far and away the two biggest sellers of smartphones in the world. Obviously, I'm sure you could guess this relatively easily. Number one is Apple with their iPhones, and number two is Samsung, and they sell the S series, the A series. They sell a whole wide variety of smartphones, and then everyone else kind of falls in behind them. Some Chinese companies are up there really high that you may not realize. Companies like Xiaomi sell a lot of phones, but they don't sell what Samsung sells, and they certainly don't sell what Apple sells either. You may have seen a headline. I saw it first on Sam Mobile, and it reads as the following: Samsung's 50 million unsold phones are a bad omen for the market. 50 million unsold phones. You may have seen that headline. You might have thought to yourself, I don't know what that means. What does it mean to have 50 million unsold phones? These are just phones sitting in a warehouse somewhere, sitting on the shelf, waiting to be sold. Is that a lot? Is that a little more than normal? Is it a lot more than normal? We're going to talk about what this kind of means and what it means for Samsung, what it means for the phone market in general, and also Apple, because they're part of the phone market, right? But they're kind of off doing their own thing to some degree, and I think they're going to be less affected by what's going on here. So the first question we have to answer is 50 million unsold phones that big of a deal? So in general, Samsung, just like any other company, look, they're not making phones as they're being sold. They're not made to order. They make a whole bunch of them. They get sent out through different supply chains, and then they get sold from there. It's the difference between shipped and sold, right? So the next thing is 50 million a lot? Is that bad? Well, in this article from Sam Mobile, they kind of give us some information on this here. They say it wasn't surprising to hear that Samsung is struggling to sell as many smartphones as it had initially planned this year. A report from Korea highlighted that there are now 50 million unsold Galaxy smartphones stuck with Samsung's distributors. Normally, this number is below 10% of the company's total expected smartphone shipments for the year. It's now at 18% of Samsung's 2022 target. So normally they've got 10% of what they hope to sell in these distribution pipelines, and now it's up to 18%. They're getting backed up. They're sending phones, but they're not being sold at the rate that they had expected. Well, how bad is this? You may be wondering. Well, Samsung has already reduced their production by 30 million units. They were expecting to ship 300 million. Now they're at 270. And as they write here on Sam Mobile, it is going to be a miracle if they're actually able to ship even that many. Now, to continue sort of telling this story and exploring where this may be leading, we need to move over to an article over on Counterpoint, where they have some really interesting data. This is the top 10 models share of the global smartphone market, April 2022. And as you can see here, Apple is dominating this list. 1, 2, 3, and 4 is Apple. And the iPhone 13 is just far and away outselling everything else on the market. Then we get the S22 Ultra, but then from there it goes A series Galaxy, then you get the cheaper iPhone, then it goes A series, and then a Xiaomi device. And what I want to kind of really drive home here from this bit of information is this. You would look at this and you would think, well, Apple clearly sells the most smartphones, but that's not true. Samsung still sells overall globally more phones. And the way that they do this is because they have a ton of these A-series phones. If this wasn't a top 10, if this was a top 25, you would see more and more and more of those A-series phones, and they all sell pretty well. They don't sell like the iPhone 13 sells, but they all sell relatively well, and that adds up. Samsung's bread and butter is with mid-range and cheaper phones. You may think the S22 Ultra, that's their flagship. That's the one that needs to sell the most. That's what's going to actually make them their money, but that's not true. The Flips, the Folds, the S22, the S series in general, that's not where they make their money. It's with the A series. It's with the cheap phones and the budget phones. Apple, you can see here, dominates the premium phone market. That's where Apple, you could say Apple makes all their money in the premium phone market, but they don't sell a cheap phone. The SE is their cheapest phone, and they only make that one line, and it's not really a cheap phone. It's just cheaper, right? So Apple only sells premium phones, but they dominate that share of the market. And while we have seen reports that Apple is selling fewer phones than they would like to be selling, right? I've seen reports that what they're hoping to ship and produce is flattening, right? So normally with Apple, they're on a constant incline. They're always making more phones and selling more phones than the years prior. As of late, it's beginning to flatten. And we've wondered, why that is, what's going on there. But not nearly the same way that Samsung is flattening and in fact now going the wrong direction. They're actually producing fewer phones this year than in years gone by. And the reason for this is exactly what I'm talking about here, that disparity between premium phones and budget, mid-range, that kind of thing. The phones that Samsung is failing to sell the most of now is actually the A series line. It's the mid-range and down. Those phones are the ones getting backed up, and the premium phones, like your S series, like your iPhones, are still selling relatively as well as they ever did. Granted, again, flattening, margin of error, all that good stuff, but you know what I'm saying. It's the mid-range and down that is taking the brunt of this downturn. And I think it's really not that difficult to understand why that would be the case. Look around the world currently. We are on the precipice of a recession. No one wants to say the word recession. Are we in one? Have we been in one? Are we going into one? Nobody knows. These are made up words. But at any rate, you can tell people's wallets are getting tighter than they used to be. And in general, when it comes to times like these that we are currently in, the people that get hit first and the hardest tend to be the people with less money. And the people with less money are the ones that are buying Samsung's phones more often than not, the mid-range and down. And those people aren't buying phones right now because it costs $100 to put gas in their tank. And we're not going to, please, let's not get into politics in the comments below. If I start seeing that stuff, I'm just going to delete it. That's not the conversation I'm interested in having on this channel. We know that there's problems. Let's just move past that, not on this channel. Closest to that dangerous water that I will dip my toes in is just the simple observation of this. The premium phones are continuing to sell relatively well. The cheaper phones are selling less well. And I think that would potentially point towards some sort of inequality where there are people that are not really being affected by what's going on. They're still buying their $1,000 phones. And then there's everyone else who can't afford to do that anymore, who can't even afford to buy the cheaper phones that they were going to buy before. From there, make the conclusions that you would like to make. Personally, I just think this is a really fascinating ongoing story where we can kind of watch in real time in my world, in the smartphone tech world. You can watch how the economics of things going on are affecting these sales. And then we're going to likely see companies reacting to this, right? How does this usually go? Well, the middle usually vanishes. You get the cheap and you get the expensive. You get the rich and you get the poor. That's just how it tends to go. Just world history if you pay attention to it. So are we going to see companies pushing towards cheaper phones? Companies like Xiaomi with their Poco phones and so forth, making these really like $200 OnePlus. Are they ahead of the curve here with their, $200 sorts of phones? They're really cheap phones. How are we going to see companies responding to this if this is a prolonged thing that continues to happen? It's going to be really interesting to see the adjustments being made. But we know right now, Samsung is taking it on the chin a little bit, and Apple kind of isn't. So guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe on your way out. And until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.